Outlaw Country by Ghotty. Chapter 14. Magic. Roars filled the air as creatures met with heavy firepower. They received the same treatment as I did, as powerful arrows and blasts of magic flew through the air. That failed miserably. Unable to stop its massive tendrils from sweeping through the clearing, they slept through every other slower guard from either faction, breaking limbs and lives. The tendril came back around for another sweep, but the Night Lady leapt into the air and slammed her blade down upon it several times, severing it in two. The connected half quickly regenerated back into the main body, while the severed half spasmed for a few moments and then just laid still. "What the hell is that?" I asked. The old man looked quite troubled. "Well, it's called a carrier, and it's a vessel for the corruption that plagues these lands. The carrier wasn't approaching us and trying to crush us with their sheer girth, but they had to be a reason why, and I quickly found out what that was. The corpses on the ground started to twitch, and they began to rise on their own. Severed limbs, missing organs, severe blood loss were reduced to minor inconveniences, and I looked carefully as I could see a tiny little parasite crawling through the undergrowth and latching on to the corpses. There were hundreds of them, all emerging from the carrier. The forest squirmed with their presence, and they seemed to only go after the corpses, and they left the living well enough alone. The old man looked towards the battle, and then towards me, towards the battle again, and then finally back at me. He clasped his hands together and bowed his head. "Fellow Taoist, grace us with your assistance. We cannot allow any harm to befall our patrons." "Can't handle it alone," I smirked and scratched my growing beard as I looked down at him from top of Jeff. He looked very, very bitter. Prior to coming here, such a creature wouldn't be fit to kiss the ground I walked on. "No, sirree, no, we cannot." Jeff whinnied from below me. It seemed like he had decided to hide the fact that he could talk, which was odd, but I'd ask him about it later on. "Can you pay?" He nodded, his hands still clasped. "Indeed, we may have fallen, but we still possess the wealth of a great family. We would be in your debt." The guards were still fighting the corpses, and the carrier had produced more large tendrils to attack with, and they flew through the air like whips, attempting to strike at the guards, but they were largely intercepted by the Lady Knight. The rest of the guards were not struggling to kill the bandits, and they were even more tenacious than they had been in real life. It confused me. Clearly something was controlling them while they were alive, but now they were being commandeered like meat puppets. Does that carrier have multiple avenues for control? I'd need to find that out, in case I run into it again, which I most assuredly will, as if it had some sort of method of controlling the living creatures, and I should just turn around and run. Some of the tendrils got past us and turned some of the slower guards into paste with a single strike, probably too fast for the bronze cores to even see. The Lady Knight screamed in rage. "Hurry the hell up and help me, you senile old fuck!" He ignored her and continued to bow to me, and I took the situation and gauged my chances. As I did have such a method, then it likely would have used it already. I was probably safe all the way over here. People died while I mused, and it wasn't about to affect my decision. Risk assessments were important, after all. "Do these carriers have weak spots?" I asked. The old man nodded. "Its core is in the center of its body. Destroy that, and the creature dies." I dismounted from Jeff and patted his flank. He got the message and scurried off in the opposite direction of the horrific monstrosity. "Get its mouth open," I demanded. It wasn't so much its mouth as it was a gaping maw, but I knew what I meant. "This senior thanks you," he said gratefully, and flew off to rejoin the battle. He wasn't literally flying, but his stride was long and smooth, giving the illusion of gliding across the ground. It was an impressive technique. He rejoined the battle, and his blade flashed through the air, severing another appendage on its way to crush a guard. Finally deciding to join us, the snarky little night lady said, as she cut another fleshy limb into pieces. She seemed upset. "We must force the carrier's maw open and grant a fellow Taoist an opportunity." Oh, so now he wants to help. He did seem amicable to mundane rewards. Of course he was. It was impressive that they had room to bicker while fighting for their lives. Not my problem anyway. If they can't do their part, I'll just cut my losses and leave. I have no obligation to these people, and I'd like to think I don't care. I drew my walker and poured energy into it. I didn't need to load ammo into it anymore, as the gun was more of a focus for energy as opposed to an actual gun. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to shoot more than 6 projectiles out into the air. The more I focused into it, the harder it was, the longer it took. It seems to have time to give them a chance to do their jobs while I prepare to do mine. The old man, the lady knight, were cutting the path towards the main body of the creature. The remaining guardsmen flew close behind, keeping as many bandit corpses off the duo's back as they could. Every few seconds, a guardsman would fall to a knife to the back or a tendril to the front, and there was very little brown left visible on the dirt road. It was mostly obscured by blood and entrails. The carrier screeched with rage, and broken flesh that made up its body pulsing an even deeper shade of red as its tendrils stretched even further, its influence on the surrounding forest extending more and more. The roaring grew increasingly distorted with every injury the creature sustained. It was ear-splitting, and the sound beyond vocal cords. It didn't really bother me, as I was growing uncomfortably used to unholy screeches. I could feel my walker grow even heavier and longer. I infused energy into it. So I held out my left arm and propped the barrel against it. I'm not too sure, but I suspect the gun itself would explode if it wasn't for the added weight. "I'll take the right," shouted the knight, and then he approached the gaping maw from the carrier. The old man nodded and then split up. Both of them were knee-deep in red by the time they reached the mouth, the creature screeching and thrashing about. But the duo held strong. The old man flipped through the air, jumping off a flailing limb of red, and he gracefully dodged and counterattacked every attack aimed at him. I could see the energy condense around his body as he swung his blade, severing a muscle from controlling the left side of his jaw. On the opposite end, the lady knight was carving her way through the objective, only glowing with energy. She ignored minor hits to her armor and stopped the heavier ones with powerful yet tightly controlled swings. The ground below her cracked as she put her weight forward, swinging her sword hard enough to carve through the opponent's end of its jaw. The creature's sad excuse for a mouth was now wide open, but so were the duo. They were surrounded by a mass of flesh, and the guardsmen lacked the skills needed to carve open a path of retreat, and I questioned the wisdom of trusting their lives in the hands of a man they just met, but I suspect they had no better options. The old man didn't turn to me, and he yelled, "Now's your chance, fellow." "I know," I interrupted him. "I didn't need him to call me my damn shot. Get the hell out of my way." They both created as much distance between them and the creature as they could, and I steadied my aim, barrel resting on my arm, and I took a deep breath, and time slowed as the creature thrashed, and I adjusted my stance, anticipating a heavy recoil. I exhaled and pulled the trigger. The blast was deafening, even for me. My boots dug into the cracked ground, and I could hear the trees behind me crackling as the back blast reached them. The projectile itself blew a hole straight through several bandits and dozens of tendrils, straight through the center of the carrier and out the other tree line above. For a moment, I could see straight through the battlefield, and even I caught a clear glimpse of the clear blue sky. Then physics caught up with the destruction, and blood rained down all over the place. Several guardsmen were knocked over with the shockwave from the invisible projectile that reached them. The duo both covered their faces as gore from the carrier painted the tree line, and the carrier collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. So, too, did the bandits, whatever method it was using to control them dying along with it. There was silence as the proverbial dust settled, or maybe they were all just momentarily deaf. I gave the walker a fun little twirl, and I stowed back into my holster, and I readjusted my hat and somehow managed to stay on my head. I did what I was paid for. Now, let's discuss payment. Combat over. Assessing performance. Skill gained. Infused shot 4. Core progress 40%. The wanted dead or alive poster, Buck Jones, 500,000 chips. Silver core. Occupation, vagabond. Stats, body 11 with a 2.0 modifier. Speed, 16.3 with a 4.0 modifier. Mind, 8.4 with a 2.0 modifier. Skills, Rampage 5, Infused Shot 4. Traits, Bandito 1, Deadeye, Mark 2 L. Unique skill, Erudite, Outlaw.